Welcome back. It's Midday. I'm Tom Hall. If you've just joined us, we're celebrating this Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service by learning about the work of 3 African-American women who are making a difference here in Baltimore. My next guest is CJay Philip. She's the founder of Dance and Bmore. It's a performing arts group that taps into the talent of little kids and youth and adults and even senior citizens. CJay Philip joins us on Zoom. Hey, CJay, happy holiday.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about the organization Dance and Bmore and why you decided to conjure it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I founded Dance and Bmore in 2010 here in Baltimore with the hopes of helping to create community and connection through music and movement. And we started first with families with our Fazafam Family Jam. And we then expanded to elder arts programming at the Waxter Senior Center. And to date, we have several programs. And our mission really is to help people to connect to one another, to connect to the arts at every age and stage of their life. And so you can come to a Dance and Bmore program as a pre-K at 3 years old, or you can come to an adult free ballet class at 37 and say, hey, I've never taken ballet, but I always wanted to, and here I am. Or you can come as a senior citizen in your 80s to our elder arts programming and plug into creativity really at any time of your life, because you don't age out of creativity. And so we're here for you to join in at whatever stage you're at.
Yeah, that's terrific. You don't indeed age out of creativity. And you come to this as a very experienced performing artist yourself. You were on Broadway. Tell us a little bit about your background as a performing artist.
Yeah, so I grew up in upstate New York, and I had dreams of being on Broadway. And I remember going to New York City and auditioning and sort of plugging away like every struggling artist. And I was fortunate enough to be on Broadway in a few different shows. I was in the original Broadway cast of Big the Musical. I was also in a show called Street Corner Symphony. And then I went on tour with Dreamgirls, and I became a dance captain for Hairspray on Broadway. And that was actually my first trip to Baltimore, was to help mount the Broadway national tour of Hairspray at the old Mechanic Theater. And so that was my first visit, and got to see Baltimore and had no idea I would move here years later. And I'm so glad I did. And got to travel the world doing a lot of different shows, Legally Blonde, and started directing and writing and choreographing, and started winning competitions as choreographers and sort of the next big Broadway choreographers. I won something called Dance Break in 2007. And then in 2009, we moved to Baltimore, and people in New York thought I was crazy. And they were like, you're just about to make it and do something big. Why are you leaving New York and going to Baltimore? And I have to tell people it was the best move I could have ever made. I have absolutely loved the creative community here in Baltimore and felt so much more at home here. The sense of collaboration, the way that I feel personally as a woman and a woman of color, that there are so many opportunities and options for me to really spread my wings, to lead, to do all kinds of things that were a bit of a challenge, if I'm honest, in what was a bit of a boys' club in New York when it came to being on Broadway. And so, creating Dance and Bmore here, knowing that I come from a family of community activists and social workers who really needed their life's work to connect to community, I felt the same way about my art. I didn't want to dance for just dance sake. I wanted my dancing, my writing, my music to have some sort of impact. And so that's really what I'm striving for with Dance and Bmore. And coming full circle now, the company is doing great. The organization is thriving. We have several programs. We meet thousands of people a year. We have a teen program called Voices of Carmen that, oddly enough, in 2022 got an honorable mention in the Broadway Tony Award playbill for artistic excellence. And so we're coming full circle. And I thought, I do love the theater and Broadway, but I don't feel like moving back to New York. I love Baltimore. So I'm going to do Broadway right here in Baltimore. And that's how we started Bmore Broadway Live.
Well, it's great to have you here. And you and I first met a few years ago talking about this Voices of Carmen production, which was a thing that did involve young people, high school kids, and it was a kind of a riff on the story of Carmen, the famous opera written by Bizet back in the 19th century. But it's I think indicative of the kind of new take that you bring. There's this new, interesting, very imaginative perspective to your the productions that you come up with. So tell us a little bit about Bmore Broadway Live. It's going to open at the Motor House on the 4th of February during Black History Month, and then you'll do another show sometime later in the spring. But what's the impetus behind this show on the 4th, which is called Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope?
Yeah, I love this production. I thought it was the first production I'd ever seen, but I realized I never saw it. I just listened to the album as a little kid over and over again till I scratched the record. And later, so I've imagined Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope in my mind. It was written by Mickey Grant and Bennett Carroll. And I have just, in the research and digging into this piece, just grown to love these women and the legacy that they have left for us. The doors that they have opened, the creativity that they fostered in the sense of play and community that they created with the urban arts players in New York for African American performers and artists, as well as Puerto Rican performers and artists in the late 60s and early 70s. Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope made its Broadway debut in 1972. It was the first show that a woman had ever done on Broadway. It was the first Broadway production ever directed by an African American woman in 1972. And so, one of the things that I found really important is, we do a lot of multi generational programming with Dance and Be More, but I wanted this to help us to understand Black Broadway, and not just Blacks on Broadway, because when you go to see Dreamgirls and when you go to see Once on This Island, those shows were still written by white men. I wanted our young people in Voices of Carmen, and during the school year, they're a part of a program we call AMP Up, which is an arts mentorship program, to work in tandem with the cast to really excavate who were these creative women who were the actual creators of the songs, the book, the libretto, and staging of this show, and what was going on in their mind and in their world and in their culture that allowed them to do this kind of work. And that they shared it with us 50 years ago and that it still resonates is phenomenal. So our young people have been working since November. I'm presenting a pre-show to Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope, so the audience knows who wrote it and what they were all about before our adult cast actually performs Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope at the Motor House opening weekend, February 4th. It's a phenomenal cast. It's jazz, it's blues, it's music. It's about the African American experience, about ghetto life, about culture, feminism, poverty, all these different topics that are still plaguing us today. But the way that they do it through song, through dance, through comedy really sparks a conversation in a way that I think is very, I don't know, there's something about it that gives a sense of community and safety in the way that these women really held these topics with such care.
CJay Philip is the artistic director and founder of Dance and Be More. Their production put on by Bmore Broadway Live, which is one of many programs that Dance and Be More puts on, is called Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope. It's Midday. I'm Tom Hall. We're celebrating this Martin Luther King Day of Service by talking to folks who are in service to folks throughout our community today. And so, CJay, tell us a little bit more about Bennett Carroll, the first Black woman to ever direct a show on Broadway, as well as the composer of this show, Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope, which is, I guess, it's a musical review, right? It's a compilation of songs and a book that tells the story of Black history on Broadway. Do I have that right?
Yeah, very, very close. Yeah, it talks about the Black experience in a lot of different ways, from Black church to the neighborhood bar to little girls' hand jive games to dance, history of dance. And Vinette Carroll was a phenomenal mind. She was a psychology major. She was a gifted student, but then she found theater and sort of stumbled on it. She's Trinidadian, and her father was like, "Oh my goodness, you're going to be a philosopher. Why would you do acting? Anyone could do acting." And so she was a little bit of a disappointment then, but I hope that after doing Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope on Broadway, and then after that, collaborating again to do Your Arms Too Short to Box with God, perhaps he was maybe singing a different tune. Mickey Grant was, like I said, the first woman to have a show on Broadway. She was also the first woman to have a full contract on a soap opera
Hmm.
ever.
Hmm.
In the United States. Everybody else was just sort of day players. And there were actors who were working, but none of them had a full contract. She was the first. And yeah, she's a phenomenal talent. She also wrote Your Arms Too Short to Box with God, and as well as parts of Working and other musicals. And both of them has had incredible careers and in New York and traveled the world. And as you dig a little deeper into who they were, you realize that these women's work was just so in tuned with their community and their culture and the way that they could express that in ways that sometimes were difficult for others to do. And so I'm floored by their work. A friend of mine, Charlene Water, who's also a Broadway actress and television actress who was the original cast of Ain't Misbehavin', replaced Mickey Grant in Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope on the Bus and Truck. She did a beautiful interview with Mickey Grant that our young people in Amp Up watched. And then as a surprise, just a couple of weeks ago, we actually had Charlene come and visit on our Zoom call to tell them about what it was like to be in the rehearsal room. Some of the things that she said they were courageous, they were playful, there was joy in the room. And, it's interesting. Someone said, that's what we're doing now. Like we are living on the legacy of what they created as nurturers, as artists, as leaders, and that we get to continue that legacy is really quite beautiful and feels like an honor.
You also involve the work of a very internationally acclaimed artist named Larry Pancho Brown and his artwork. Tell us about how that will play into this production at the Motor House.
Yeah, I feel so fortunate, just really incredibly blessed to be collaborating with Larry Pancho Brown. I was interviewing him for a film project that I was directing, and I was in his studio, just my eyes were just busting out of my head at all the work, the colors, the textures, all of it. And there was one piece that said, "I am man. I am a man." And there's a song in the show, Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope, called They Call Me Man. And I thought, I want pictures, I want portraits, I want paintings of African Americans all around the stage. And I said, Larry, this painting right here, can you tell me more about it? So we got to chatting, and before, a few minutes later, he was like, let's do this. Let's have my artwork be on your set. Let's have my artwork be a part of the way that you tell this story. And I was like, are you kidding me? And so I've been pinching myself and almost thinking that it's not real until I saw him actually post something about it on social media. I was like, this is happening right now. So there's actually, when you come into the Motor House, you'll actually walk through the lobby gallery, and it's all Larry Pancho Brown's work before you even enter the theater. And then the projections within the scenes that go on in the show is Larry Pancho Brown's work and how it's related to the experiences of African Americans in the show and in the characters in the play and in the storytelling of Mickey Grant and Vinette Carroll. And it is just, it's a whole, it's taking the art to a whole nother level. It's doubling down on just the history and the culture within the piece. And it's quite chilling to see some of these images. And how do you balance that as a director? That's been, the part that I'm playing with right now, sort of not overstimulating an audience, but striking just the right balance with the visual impact as well as the theatrical.
Yeah, and
parts.
of course, and it's one of a million decisions that as a director you need to make, and it can be tricky business, absolutely. But
Yeah.
what a great idea to involve the visual arts, to involve multi-generations in all of the projects that you do. I mean, it's just terrific. CJay Philip, the founder and director of Dance and Bmore. They have a number of different programs. Their Bmore Broadway Live series begins on the 4th of February at the Motor House, a wonderful black box theater at the corner of Howard Street and North Avenue in Baltimore. And you're going to do 3 productions. You're going to do Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope in February. You'll do a musical in the spring. And then we talked about Voices of Carmen. You're going to do a revival of that in July at the Motor House. So plenty of great stuff going on there. So thanks so much, and break a leg on all of these productions. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.